5. I didn't get to 4 yet.
Oh.
Why are you holding up 4 already?
I can't
4.
imagine. 4. There you go.
3.
I'll let you do it.
2.
I can come in now.
1. We are live. Coming to you live as Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Some hope in the war-ravaged Middle East. It looks like, at long last, there is going to be a ceasefire in Gaza, a hostage release, a release of prisoners held in Israel. This is very good news, particularly for the long-suffering people in Gaza who apparently have suffered 45,000 or more deaths, an untold amount of injuries, disease, hunger, suffering. But, you know, the last time I was in the Middle East, I was told in the Middle East, nothing is as it seems. And apparently the deal is not yet finalized. And Netanyahu has postponed the vote for a few hours, I guess Friday in Israel, which is a number of hours ahead of any point in the United States. Those involved fully expect that the deal will be voted upon positively, but nothing is certain until it's signed, sealed, and delivered. Right, Sam?
Correct. It's 4:02 a.m. in Israel right now, so they probably won't be getting to the vote for even a couple more hours from now.
At least, you know, maybe even 7 or 8 hours.
Yeah. I think both of us are relieved that there's a ceasefire deal. The suffering and death in Gaza has been horrific. Hopefully it goes through. Hopefully this isn't some sort of weird hoax.
Let's hope.
But let's hope it goes through.
I believe it will, but, you know, as I said, in the Middle East, nothing is as it seems.
Yeah. There's a lot of other stuff going on, too. Biden's farewell address, the Trump appointee confirmation hearings. But let's start with our headline. Let's continue with this story. What's your take on this, Dad? I know Trump has taken credit for it. The Biden-Harris administration has taken credit for it. What's your full take on this possible ceasefire in Gaza?
I don't really care who takes credit for it at this point. What I really care is that the deal is finalized and does lead to some kind of rapprochement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Remember, it's not a permanent ceasefire. It's not a release of all of the hostages at this point, and it doesn't really resolve the bigger issues in the Middle East. Who's going to govern Gaza? Are we going to ever have a two-state solution? Is Donald Trump going to pretty much cave in to Netanyahu? And there are even those in the cabinet, by the way, who are even more extreme than Netanyahu. There are a couple of ministers in the cabinet who oppose this deal, who think it's a capitulation to Hamas and the Palestinians. And these folks, even to the right, amazingly, of Netanyahu, hard to believe, want to continue the war. They want to totally wipe out and destroy Hamas, which, of course, is never going to happen. You can't solve these problems by military means, you know. I'm fond of quoting one of my favorite presidents, a Republican, Dwight Eisenhower, who said, you know, some 70 years ago, nothing gets solved in the Middle East until you solve the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, and there is no military solution. I repeat, there is no military solution. So I am glad that it looks like there is going to be a cessation of this horrific carnage in Gaza, at least for a time, but all of the big issues between the Israelis and the Palestinians are yet to be resolved. And all of this is going to fall into the lap of the new president, Donald Trump. Now, what I also understand is that the terms of this deal are exactly, or maybe not exactly, but pretty much the same as what President Biden set forth last May. You know, there has been this incredibly long delay in working out a deal. The framework had been long ago established. Why the delay? Obviously, Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure from those on his right who are important to his ruling party. And, even now they don't approve of this deal, and they've certainly been pressuring Netanyahu for some time. Netanyahu himself wanted to postpone the deal until he could inflict more damage on Hamas, take out some of its leaders, weaken its infrastructure, weaken its hold on Gaza. And then finally, I think another reason for the delay, I can't prove this. As you know, I'm very careful. I'm saying what I think I know and what is opinion and speculation. You recall many, many months ago, long before Biden dropped out, what did I say was the most important thing that could help Biden get reelected?
A ceasefire in Israel and Gaza.
I had said that many, many times. And the truth is, there is no way, in my view, I can't prove this, and we may never be able to prove it, that Netanyahu was going to give Joe Biden that kind of victory. Remember, let's not forget, Netanyahu is Donald Trump's man in Israel. He has always had the support and the promotion of Donald Trump and the American right. No way Netanyahu was going to give something to Biden that would help Biden or any Democrat get reelected and defeat Donald Trump. On the other hand, I've got to give Trump some credit. His special envoy to the Middle East participated in the final stages of getting this ceasefire agreement across the finish line. It shows when it's in the interests of both parties, we can have some kind of bipartisan compromise, some kind of bipartisan cooperation. That's really the only way you're going to get anything done that's really in the interest broadly of the American people and the people of the world, as opposed to being in the partisan interests of one side or another. I'm not optimistic about it, but maybe there's the tiniest glimmer of hope that the bipartisanship on working out this deal could extend into the administration of Donald Trump. Again, I'm not optimistic, but I don't want to just sound a sour note. Maybe there is a glimmer of a hope for some kind of cooperative arrangements within the new Trump administration. But there is still so much to be worked out in the Middle East. And sad to say, I don't believe either Netanyahu or Donald Trump is open to really the only long-term solution to the conflict here. It's not military, it's political and diplomatic, and that is the two-state solution. Netanyahu, quite the opposite, seems intent on annexing the West Bank as part of Israel and promoting more and more settlements, and likely would get the agreement of Donald Trump in doing that. I'm not certain of that, but that does appear to be likely, and that is going to, continue to prolong the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis that has been going on for such a long time with such tragic results on both sides. So ultimately, the only hope really is stopping the conflict, stopping the warfare, and reaching a political solution that does give something to the Palestinians. You can't just keep suppressing them, but at the same time preserves the integrity and security of Israel. I have my entire life been a strong supporter of Israel and been very critical of those who are trying to undermine or even destroy the Israeli state. But that doesn't mean you have to be a supporter of Netanyahu any more than supporting the United States means you have to be a supporter of Donald Trump or even a supporter of Joe Biden. Your support for the integrity of a nation is not determined by your support for any individual political leader.
You said it all, Dad. I got nothing to add.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the confirmation. It's moving at warp speed through the Senate, and it does appear that, as we predicted some time ago, the Republicans are simply going to cave into Donald Trump. It really doesn't matter who he sends up. Doesn't matter what their qualifications are. Doesn't matter what their policies or their knowledge are. They're just going to be, automatically confirmed by Republicans who are in the Trump camp. As I've said many times, the old notion of the conflict between the MAGA Republicans and the so-called mainstream Republicans is gone. There aren't any anti-MAGA Republicans, or so few that they really don't count very much. Virtually none in the House, and maybe 2 or 3, maybe, depending on the issues in the Senate. The Republican Party is now the MAGA Party. There is no daylight between the two. If Donald Trump were to blink out tomorrow, there'd be little change within the Republican Party. Of course, Donald Trump is a unique personality, and that would change, but the approach, the policies wouldn't change one bit. Now, one of the most interesting confirmation hearings is Scott Bessent, who is being appointed to what critical position?
Treasury Secretary.
Yes. And you pointed out to me that he has a rather strange background for a Trump appointee, right?
So I went digging on this guy, Scott Bessent, a little bit because there was a clip of him and Bernie Sanders asking him if he would raise the federal minimum wage. This guy, Scott Bessent, said no. And this is a guy that, is plenty qualified. Actually, we were discussing he's the first openly gay Republican cabinet member ever, first openly gay Treasury Secretary ever if he's appointed, which is,
No, he is appointed. He if he's confirmed, which he will
confirmed,
be.
I mean, yeah. Which is cool. Breaking glass ceilings is cool.
He's one of the lesser controversial picks.
But
he's actually leaving out his views. In terms of his background, he's certainly qualified, having participated in our economic system at a very high level.
Yeah, but I was sort of curious when I saw this exchange between him and Bernie Sanders when he said he wouldn't be open to raising the federal minimum wage. I just looked him up. I thought, this guy, how much is this guy worth? Who is this guy? He's worth at least $500 million, if not a billionaire.
He's probably a billionaire.
He's most likely a billionaire. He, interestingly enough, used to be a partner at the George Soros Fund, which I found sort of odd too. So 3 things I found interesting is 1, Trump and his allies are always willing to make Soros the boogeyman, but if one of his money guys wants to go on their team, they'll take him with open arms. I thought that was interesting too.
Are you suggesting some hypocrisy
I'm
here?
I'm suggesting some hypocrisy.
Heavens, who would imagine?
We've talked a lot about, the oligarchy and the ultra-rich taking over. I think this is just another example of it. This billionaire sitting before us telling us that he won't raise the minimum wage from
$7.25. It hasn't changed in 16 years. Republicans are screaming about this inflation, this increase in prices, which is, oppressing the working class. And yet, their minimum wage is 16 years old and doesn't take into account any of the inflation that has incurred at any point. It's now probably worth just a few dollars in terms of real constant dollars adjusted
so we've got
for inflation.
We've got this billionaire sitting there telling us that he won't raise the minimum wage. And I also found it interesting because we talk a lot about how Trump actually isn't a populist. And
I had a whole lecture on that.
Right. And I think this guy sort of personifies that exact rhetoric that we put out a lot. Billionaire, won't raise the minimum wage, is going to be in charge of our treasury. You also found some stuff about him wanting to, something about the deficit or something about...
Yeah. Look, they won't raise the minimum wage. $7.25. That's about $300 for a 40-hour work week. That's about $15,000, $16,000 a year. I don't care where you live. There's no way, particularly if you have a family, you can survive on $15,000 or $16,000 a year. And that's gross. That's not net. You may not be paying personal income tax because you're below the threshold, but you're certainly paying what taxes, Sam?
Income tax?
No.
No, I don't know.
Social Security, Medicare.
Medicare
taxes. So you're not even netting $15,000 or $16,000 a year, much less, paying sales taxes and, other fees to the state. Nobody can live on that. Yet here's a billionaire saying, oh, it's really a state and local matter. I can deflect it. It's the federal minimum wage. It sets a standard for the states, and it is unlivable. And it is just incredibly unsettling to see someone who's likely a billionaire saying, we can't, pay people a minimum of more than $7.25. Same thing we paid them 16 years ago. It just established, and I want to make another point. What he does want to do, while he won't raise the minimum wage, is big tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy. When you cut corporate tax cuts, obviously you're helping America's wealthy corporate interests. When you cut the personal income tax because of the way it's structured, most of the gains, not all of them, but this is well established, goes to the top 1% and the top 5%. So let's make the rich richer and keep the working class bitingly poor. This is what Donald Trump admitted in a candid moment when he first, proposed his tax cuts. He was meeting with his very rich friends at Mar-a-Lago, and you know what he bragged to them? You're going to be even richer after we pass these tax cuts. And that brings us to another very important point. We've made the point that this is the billionaires' government. So many billionaires, not just Bessent, but so many others are either in the government or influencing the government, like Elon Musk and Ramaswamy.
Yep.
This is not populism.
No.
This is the exact opposite of populism. The thrust of populism, as our lecture pointed out, was to challenge the very rich in the interests of ordinary farmers and workers. What this administration represents is just the opposite. Which brings us to another important point. We had Joe Biden's farewell address.
Yes, and interestingly, I applaud him for it. We both applaud him for it. He, in his farewell address, addressed this and said and warned about the ultra rich and warned about the oligarchy taking control of our government.
Right, the technical industrial complex. Dwight Eisenhower in 1961 warned about the grip of the military industrial complex on our society. It's gone way beyond that. We still have the military industrial complex, but we also have much broader oligarchical control over our lives, our government, our economy, and our society. As I pointed out, 60 some odd years ago when I was a kid, I read all these science fictions. And one of the themes, which I thought, was just crazy fiction, was we'd reach a point where very few people would become so rich as compared to everybody else that they would exercise control over our lives, our economy, our society. We may not be exactly where those science fiction books imagine we would reach, but we're not far from it. We are very, very close to that. And, Biden is no radical, right?
No.
Not at all. He's, an institutionalist, mainstream, left-center Democrat. And for him to devote his farewell address to warning us about the control that the oligarchy is exercising on our lives, about the iron grip of the very rich, is really chilling. Maybe he was listening to our show and got his idea from us.
Maybe. I think it's a topic that people on the left are really starting to gravitate towards. And I think even your average American is starting to see this. But yeah, I don't get why the average American voted for Trump when, again, this guy Scott Bessent, a kind of guy that probably floats under the radar for the most part.
Sure,
but these
no one's heard of him.
Right, but these are the exact kind of people that Trump are picking to run our government. So Trump can't be for the working class. He can't really, in reality, push a populist movement when he's making billionaires the head of our Treasury Department.
And making them richer and richer. And the other thing that not only were these tax cuts going to be disproportionately going to the rich, they are going to balloon the deficit. Just extending the Trump tax cuts, according to independent analysts, is going to balloon the deficit, the debt rather, by $4 trillion, not billion, $4 trillion over the next 10 years. And of course, the Republicans are screaming about, the Biden deficits and how he's added to the national debt and how they're going to cut it. And they're claiming, of course, that this is going to be offset by spending cuts, right? Mm-hmm. They have this group, the DOGE, the Dodge Group, headed by a couple of billionaires. Right.
More billionaires.
Right, not ordinary folk, Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, and Musk is worth more than the GDP of most of the countries of the world. Well, this was tried before under Ronald Reagan, where he said, I'm going to have this commission that's going to cut waste and inefficiency and offset my big tax cuts. And just like this commission, it was headed by one of the richest persons of that time, Peter Grace, the head of W.R. Grace, the big shipping conglomerate. And did it work?
No.
It was a crashing failure because the truth is there are 4 big spending elements to the federal budget. Do you know what they are?
Military.
They're not going to cut the military. They want to increase spending on the military.
Social Security
and Medicare, Medicaid. The members of the House and the Senate are not going to cut those programs that people depend on, that go into their districts.
Military, Medicaid, 2 more big sources of spending.
Servicing on the debt.
Oh.
And you can separate Social Security and the medical programs at 4. None of those are cuttable. You can't cut servicing the debt. In fact, it's going to increase, right?
Right.
As they add to the debt.
Compounds, right?
They want to increase spending on the military. And Congress is not going to have the stomach to cut money coming into their districts. So there really isn't room to cut without cutting into the blood and muscle of the government, without cutting the military, cutting Medicare, cutting Medicaid, cutting Social Security. During the Reagan administration, none of that happened because members of the House and the Senate were not willing to kill Santa Claus in their states and their districts. And by the way, the medical programs and Social Security, they're largely check writing operations. There's very little administrative cost. The only way you could save a lot of money is actually to cut into the programs themselves. This idea of waste and inefficiency, it's a mirage, as was proven during the Reagan administration, when in fact the deficit increased by nearly 3-fold over the course of Ronald Reagan's 2 terms, with virtually no offset from this so-called waste and inefficiency Grace Commission. And we're going to see the same thing from the Dodge Commission.
Right. So anybody comes to you telling you that Trump is for the working class, just clip this and send it to them, right?
Yeah.
Anything. I watched Biden's farewell address. I think I maybe missed the last minute or so, but I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I did too.
We're going to do a full show on Biden's legacy probably next Thursday, but we're not exactly sure yet. So stay tuned for that, right?
Yeah, next Tuesday, obviously, we'll be talking about the inauguration and the inaugural address, which will be occurring that Monday, the day before.
Yeah. Anything else to add to our 3 main topics? Ceasefire, confirmation hearings, farewell address before we move on to questions.
I think I just want to say, we are going to discuss the Biden legacy at depth. But there is something incredibly puzzling about the Biden legacy. Why is his approval ratings in the dump? Historically, the only time you see such low approval ratings is when a sitting president is presiding over a failed war like Korea or Vietnam, or presiding over a incredible economic downturn like the recession of 2008 or the recession of 2020. None of that is manifest on the Biden record. There is no big national setback for the country like that on the Biden record. And yet still, his approval ratings.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about poor messaging all the time, but it doesn't seem like that can be enough. Like, poor messaging.
There's more to it, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
But that is strange. A very puzzling aspect of the Biden legacy.
Yeah.
And if you want to tune in tomorrow on The Hill, it's at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. I'll be talking about the Biden legacy on the Hill channel, the channel of the Hill newspaper.
The newspaper? I don't think the Hill has the Hill ever published
magazine.
A newspaper?
I guess they're all digital now. All digital. Whatever it is, the Hill channel.
Also tonight at 11 Eastern, you will be on The Daily Show.
I will. That's already been taped, so I'm not sure what is going to come down. But we'll be talking about, something that critics have blasted. Oh, you were wrong. Of course, I admitted I was wrong.
Right.
Like within hours of the election, but critics are still saying, "Oh, we got you. You were wrong." Mm-hmm. I've had a 42-year record. I admitted constantly
we don't need to go
in my predictions. I just want to make this last point that nothing lasts forever. Historical patterns could change, and I could be wrong.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be funny on The Daily Show.
It's supposed to be funny.
Yeah,
and I love being poked fun at.
We also, my first experience, we were recognized today. Well, you were recognized,
yes.
But the first time in my life someone has come up to us and said, "I'm a big fan of the podcast."
I recognize you because I follow your podcast.
Right.
Yes.
So, sir, if you're watching, shout out to you. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks
in
for
our gym.
Hello.
Your gym.
My gym. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to questions. Before we move on to questions, a couple housekeeping things. We only have 324 likes on today's stream, and we've got 1,100 people watching. Dad, let's get those. Let's get those up. Let's get those up.
Those likes.
Let's get those likes up.
Those memberships. Those donations.
Get them all up.
Keep us going.
Subscribe. Don't forget. Don't forget.
Don't forget. Actually,
what?
Say something about our subscribers.
Oh, go ahead.
We had 162 subscribers before the election.
162,000.
162,000.
Not 162.
Right, yes. And that went down slightly, not hugely, about 3% to 157. But in recent days, we've shot up. We're now at a new record, exceeding even our pre-election record. We're now at 163,000 subscribers. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for subscribing.
Thank you for subscribing.
That's been big for us. I know, after the election, we were all pretty down.
Yeah.
The person that we wanted to win lost. The person that he predicted lost. And then we started losing subscribers. We're kind of like, holy shit. But, we're climbing back. I think it's a testament to just making sure that we're creating quality content for everybody out there. We're trying to speak the truth, speak from our heart, and just, be entertaining, right?
Right.
Do something funny right now.
Yeah.
Go.
Skimdy Vindy.
Okay. That's his fun. That's always his funny thing. But yeah, thank you all for subscribing. Thank you all for watching. All right, let's get into our first question of the night. Professor, with all the insults California is receiving from Trump and company, do you think that it's a good idea for California to stop sending federal taxes and break as an independent state?
It's a tempting idea, but it's a bad one.
No, it's a bad one. Come on.
Because you would deprive America of 2 senators, dozens of 2 Democratic senators, dozens of Democratic representatives, and deprive really the nation of very important liberal voices and liberal policymakers. So it's kind of like, cutting off your nose to spite your face. But, I am appalled by how the Republicans, instead of showing compassion and empathy and using this tragedy in California to bring us together, like Ronald Reagan did after the Challenger or Bill Clinton did after Oklahoma City, they did the opposite. They politicized it with, as usual, a whole bunch of lies and fabrications. And now they're talking about making aid to make whole or at least to mitigate the people affected by this horrible tragedy, conditional on their political preferences. Can you imagine if Biden had made aid to the victims of the hurricanes in Florida conditional on Democratic priorities? Republicans would have been screaming the end of Western civilization as we know it. You know, it is so sad that we can't come together and do the right thing for the victims of this horrible tragedy.
Be Like Water says, you guys are like Laurel and Hardy. Who's that?
Those are two early famous comedians.
Oh. Who's Laurel? Who's Hardy?
I don't know. One was skinny and one was fat.
Oh.
And neither one of us is especially fat. So
I'm fatter than you for sure.
Yeah,
so I'll be the fat one.
I think Hardy was the fat one and Laurel was the skinny one.
All right, there you go.
But I'm not positive. It's been a long, long time since I've seen them.
If the ceasefire goes through, would Trump get the foreign policy success key? What do you think will take? This is a different question. Let's start with that. If the ceasefire goes through, would Trump get the foreign policy success key?
No, it's not something that happened on his watch. You know, he came in at the last minute. I give him credit for that. But this was something really being pushed for many, many months by the previous administration of Joe Biden. And as I pointed out, it was very much in accord with the framework that Biden had laid out in May of 2024. So, you know, I was willing to give credit where credit is due to Donald Trump, but it's not a foreign policy triumph of his administration, which hasn't taken office yet.
Well, what do you think will take down Nate Silver and his model in a Revenge of the Jedi fashion?
Nothing, because Nate Silver's the ultimate hedger. He never actually comes out and tells you who is going to win. He always gives you these probabilities. So no matter what happens, he can say, I wasn't wrong. I told you, I slightly predicted a win for Harris. I also said there was almost an equal chance of Trump winning. Meaningless. Doesn't tell you anything. Same thing, back in 2016 when he predicted, I don't know, something between, depending when you looked, a 75 to 80% chance of Hillary Clinton winning. Then when she loses, see, I told you there was a 25 to 30% chance that she would lose. So nothing can derail him because he doesn't give you real predictions, and his predictions don't teach you anything. Whatever you may think of the keys to the White House, they tell you a lot about how American presidential elections really work, and they present an alternative to the trivial, negative, soundbite-driven campaigns. Polls tell you nothing. They're just snapshots of a given point in time. They give you no insight into how elections really work or how we could change our very dreary campaigning.
Is the timing and issues exact or close to what we've seen with the release of the hostages from the Iran hostage crisis in 1981?
It's very close. The hostages were released on the day that Ronald Reagan took over the presidency from Jimmy Carter, and presuming that the deal comes through, and remember, it's not a complete hostage release, unlike what happened in 1981. It's a partial hostage release, but it's likely to happen the day before Donald Trump takes over, or maybe even on that very day, depending on when the vote takes place in Israel and the results of that vote.
Dr. Lichtman, you said that Donald Trump is a plutocrat, but would you say congressional Republicans and potentially the Republican Party are going that route?
Absolutely.
Wait, what's a plutocrat again? I forgot.
Someone who is for the rich and the powerful.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. As I said, there is no daylight any longer between Donald Trump and the Republicans, the so-called mainstream Republicans. A bad name, but we know what we're talking about, the more moderate Republicans who are not simply in the pocket of Donald Trump. They're gone. They are an insignificant element of the Republican Party. Remember, when Donald Trump was campaigning for his second nomination, virtually every Republican office holder in the Senate, the House, state legislators, governors, all lined up behind Donald Trump. They were not interested in any alternative to Donald Trump. So as I said, yes, if Donald Trump blinked out tomorrow, the thrust of the Republican Party would not change.
About the minimum wage, do you think it should be corrected every year by inflation growth or GDP growth?
Probably inflation growth. They do that with Social Security. You know who tied Social Security to the inflation growth? Someone you might not expect. And it wasn't a Democrat.
Nixon.
Very good.
Oh,
you nailed it.
Hey.
The COLA, the cost of living. So if it's Social Security is tied to the cost of living, why not tie the minimum wage to the cost of living? You know, it doesn't have to be every single year, but certainly, you know, in terms of a minimum living wage, you've got to take into account inflation. You know, $7.25 16 years ago is virtually worthless today.
Our good friend President Belichick.
Oh, yes. He's been around forever.
He's been around forever. I believe he's also a history teacher, a high school history teacher. So shout out to you, President Belichick. But no shout outs to Belichick, the coach. We don't like him.
No, we don't.
No. But President Belichick asks, are you willing to share where some keys are likely to stand before Trump takes office?
Probably not, because I'm still, you know, reevaluating the keys. You know, as I said, the pattern of history has changed. You know, we are in an era of disinformation unlike anything we've ever seen in the history of the country. And, you know, I've talked about that at great length. I've given you a host of evidence to demonstrate that. And in light of that, you know, I'm reconsidering and reevaluating the system. As I said many times, a 42-year record is a pretty good one, but nothing lasts forever. There's a song about that, right? Nothing lasts forever but the earth and the sky.
I don't know that song. What song is that?
Bob Denver, I think.
Bob Denver?
John Denver, yeah.
Bob Denver.
Denver. Think of Bob Danvers.
Oh, okay. Roy with a $5 donation.
Thank you.
Say, I argue repeal the 17th Amendment. Hamilton argued in the Federalist Senators. In the Federalist. Sorry, this is the punctuation here. I agree. I argue to repeal the 17th Amendment. Hamilton argued in the Federalist that senators will be less prone to faction/mob rule like MAGA. GOP senators may have convicted January 6th without the 17th Amendment. Do you get all that?
I'm not sure what he's driving at. You saying that you think the state legislature should continue to elect U.S. senators?
Okay. Well, what's the 17th Amendment, first of all?
Yeah, the direct election of senators.
No.
I think, I'm trying to recall, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Check that out.
The 17th Amendment established the direct election of United States senators in each state.
Right. So instead of having the state senate elect senators, it's the direct election of senators by the people. And I think to go back to the corrupt, gerrymandered state senators picking senators would be a huge error, because you have so many legislatures that have been gerrymandered by Republicans, even in states that have sent Democratic senators like Wisconsin or Michigan. You're going to greatly tilt the U.S. Senate, which is already tilted in that way because there's 2 senators for every state, tilted even more towards Republicans and conservatives. And it's a step backward in democracy as well.
Def Leppard wants you to know that the line you were just singing is from Dust in the Wind by Kansas.
Oh, okay.
So thank you, Def Leppard.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Obviously,
I knew I remembered it from somewhere.
They got good rock knowledge. So
right,
thank
but
you.
I got the line right.
There you go.
Just the wrong.
Congrats to you, sir.
Yes.
Shake it. Try to shake it with your other hand.
Oh.
Wait, that's your right hand, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah. How did Ron Paul's ideas influence American politics during his campaigns, and do you think his views still have an impact today?
Oh, I think they do to a limited extent. You know, Paul was a libertarian, and libertarians believe that we should have an absolute minimal government. They want to abolish the IRS. They want to bring all the troops home from abroad. They want the military to just be a domestic defense unit. They don't want any regulation of the economy by government, and they don't want any regulation of personal behavior. You want to, indulge in pornography, patronize prostitutes, take drugs. All of that is fine as long as it doesn't hurt or impact someone else. And his ideas obviously, resonate to some extent with both liberals and conservatives. Conservatives endorse the idea of minimal regulations over the operations of business, but obviously are on the opposite when it comes to regulating personal behavior. Democrats are more inclined to have minimal government when it comes to regulating personal behavior, but more inclined to have government regulate the operations of business. But this long predates Ron Paul. The libertarian movement really dates to a breakaway in the 1960s from the Barry Goldwater conservative Republican campaign.
Take a drink there, guy. You have a little Diet Coke left here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Not really. Nah.
No, it's flat.
Yeah. I'm drinking water. How about
Wow.
that? Yeah.
Good stuff. What did Richard Nixon mean by the, quote, silent majority?
Yes. He meant basically white, primarily middle-class persons who were not out demonstrating in the streets like anti-war students or those African Americans pushing for civil rights, that they were largely silent and not vociferously pursuing their interests or disrupting law and order within society. And he was going to appeal to that silent majority and win their votes overwhelmingly as part of his new Republican coalition.
What are your thoughts on El Salvador's gang crackdown? Their homicide rate dropped from 106.3 per capita in 2015 to 1.7 per capita in 2024. I feel America should do the same because they're being too soft on crime and gangs, especially gang culture, which is why gang culture is so bad in the U.S.
I don't know what El Salvador did, to be honest with you, and I can't validate those numbers, but America is hardly soft on crime. We have, if not the highest, but one of the highest incarceration rates of any nation in the world. We have some of the largest, most aggressive police forces in the world. You are not going to stop in the United States gang activity by somehow militarizing the police, unleashing them, not engaging in any kind of reasonable regulation. That's not an answer to anything. And by the way, crime is down, not up. That's another element of the disinformation, that crime has been soaring under Biden. It's actually down, and it is vastly lower than the peak of crime some 30 or more years ago.
Professor, what's your take on the North Carolina Republicans disputing Allison Riggs' election here in North Carolina?
Yeah, it's just another example.
Who's that? I don't know who that is.
She is
Let me look her up.
Candidate, a progressive candidate
Supreme
for
Court.
a position on the Supreme Court. I believe she's an incumbent on the Supreme Court and seeking re-election.
Yeah.
A very progressive woman, a strong supporter of civil rights. She had worked with civil rights organizations prior to gaining a position on the Supreme Court. She narrowly won, but she won. She won by a bigger margin than George W. Bush won the presidency, and by winning in Florida in 2000. She won by something like 700 votes. And, of course, Republicans are trying to toss out tens of thousands of votes in an effort to prevent her from rightfully taking her seat on the Supreme Court. It's exactly what we saw Donald Trump trying to do in order to preserve his power in 2020. And we've seen this across the nation, attempts by Republicans to limit opportunities for people to vote and even to throw out their votes. They believe they have a real chance for this, as bogus as it may be, because you have a very conservative Republican Supreme Court in North Carolina, one which overturned a previous decision striking down the egregious congressional gerrymander in North Carolina and allowing the gerrymander to go into effect. In a closely contested state, the gerrymander has resulted in the congressional delegation being overwhelmingly Republican. In fact, the North Carolina gerrymander, one could argue, is responsible for the Republican majority. It turned enough seats to the Republicans to account for the very narrow majority in the U.S. House. So now they're trying to deny the reelection of this liberal civil rights advocate, Allison Riggs.
Diane Cassiner says, Rudy, sometimes I can't speak. Rudy Giuliani really got off easy. Why?
Yeah, it's the same thing we've all seen with Donald Trump. Defect, deny, delay. This case has been rolling on for many years. Giuliani has evaded consequences. It's one thing to get a judgment. It's another thing to collect. And Giuliani, like this guy who headed InfoWars, what's his name?
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones, also had this huge judgment and, for years has been evading it. And that's what Giuliani's been doing.
This may be out of your reach, but do you believe in any human theories? For example, consciousness, natural law, free will, etc.?
I definitely believe in free will. I have some sympathy for natural law, but that's a much longer discussion. But I'm definitely a strong believer in free will. And, natural law is something that's very controversial because how do you know what the natural law is? I'm more a believer in the development of law through constitutions, through legislation, through bills of rights, through protections of people's civil, political rights and liberties.
What is the future of the Democratic Party? Is it liberal or progressive? Also, from my own question, what's the difference between liberal and progressive?
There really isn't one. Progressive is a term that was applied to the reform movement of the early 20th century. Things like pure food and drug regulation, railroad regulation, antitrust measures, cleaning up the slums, establishing minimum wages and workmen's compensation, direct election of senators, women's suffrage, direct primaries. And the word progressive migrated into the word liberal under Franklin Roosevelt, who really was the transformational liberal president, who in many ways was the heir of the progressive movement, but FDR's liberal movement was not identical to that of the progressives. And so the term liberal kind of supplanted that of progressive. But what happened in the 1980s with, big Democratic losses is the term liberal came to be discredited, came to be almost an epithet. And a lot of liberals preferred to go back to using the term progressive. But at this point, it's a terminological, not a substantive difference.
Gotcha. Hither Music says, do you think we are in a new phony war period? Also, you two are way more charming than Laurel and Hardy. Well, thank you for that.
I like that. They are from a very different era.
What is a phony war period? Like a Cold War type thing?
Yeah, a Cold War, or it was war between the U.S. and France back in the John Adams administration. And I think there is a lot of truth to that. We're not in a declared war, but we are engaged in, what one might call a phony war. We're engaged in warfare in the Middle East, right? We're not fighting the war in Gaza, but who are we fighting against? The Houthis in Yemen. It's turned into a hot war, even though it's scarcely acknowledged. There's kind of a phony war in the Far East, with the United States and China competing for predominance. So I think that there is definitely some truth to that.
You about to say something else?
What?
Were you about to say something else?
I'm good.
Okay. This is from Here for Today 42. They say, part of authoritarian rule is to go after independent journalists. Do you think Trump will try this, or will he be too busy attacking bigger fish? If he tries it, what legal foundation does he have to do so?
Well, he's already been successful in suing ABC on the grounds of defamation. He's suing a small target, the Des Moines Register, which sponsored the poll showing him losing in Iowa to Joe Biden, even though he won in very big terms in Iowa, claiming it's election interference. But what I think is more significant is the way in which the media is being taken over by billionaires, like the owners of the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, big corporations like the owners of ABC, who have many interests above and beyond their media outlets, interests above and beyond what is, the quintessential purpose of the media, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. They don't want to afflict Donald Trump, because they have all kinds of economic interests above and beyond the media that they own, and they know that Donald Trump is very vindictive. They're running on the typical motivations of fear and greed. They're fearful of the vindictive Donald Trump, and they're greedy for favors from Donald Trump. So, he may not have to be all that aggressive, although I think he may well be. The media is already capitulating and bowing down to Donald Trump and indicating it's not going to be much of a counterweight.
Our first Discord question of the night. If you want to join our Discord, the link to that is in the description of this video. We also have a Reddit page. Right, Dad?
Yes. Whatever you say.
What do you know about Reddit and Discord?
Whatever you tell me.
Right. This question is from Amamimia. They say, will the backlash surrounding TikTok doom many senators and representatives next election?
I don't see that. You are more expert in this than I am, but I don't see why.
No shot. That's going to have any effect.
That would directly affect the election prospects.
I guess they're thinking maybe young people will rise up and vote out all these senators and representatives who wanted to ban TikTok.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Unfortunately, it never works that way.
It never works that way.
Yeah. What actionable steps might someone be able to take to disrupt the wheel of misinformation? I'm itching for some good trouble. This is from Absolute Zero.
Yeah, I have a book on this. I have a book on everything, as you know. It's called 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump. And I have a whole section on how to combat disinformation. Unfortunately, it takes action both on the part of the independent media and on the part of the government, and we are really not seeing anything like that likely to come out either of the independent media, and certainly not out of the Trump administration, which is likely to do the opposite. But we do have new technology now, which if the media would use it, can provide instant fact-checking, something that Trump and his allies absolutely hate. And there are ways of regulating social media to combat the disinformation, but we're seeing just the opposite happening. What is Mark Zuckerberg doing with Meta? eliminating rather than expanding fact-checking. So, best I can tell you is, in your own local community, try to disseminate and deal with the truth. If you can write op-eds for your local newspaper, spelling out the truth.
There are no more local newspapers.
A very good thing. What?
There are no more local newspapers.
There are some. There are some.
Not many.
Not many, but you're not going to get your op-ed in the New York Times or USA Today. That's why I suggest local newspapers. It's your best outlet. But sadly, I wish I could tell you something different, but the outlook for truth is very, very grim right now.
This is our second Discord question from Christopher. They said, I've heard in earlier editions of your book on the 13 keys, the short-term economy key did revolve around people's perception of the keys. So regardless of those two keys, will they need to be re-examined to consider more in-depth people's perspective of it?
That's possible. But remember, right now these keys are objective. We're talking about the long-term economy key is absolutely quantitative, is real per capita economic growth during the term at least equal to the average of the previous two terms. That's just straight math. The short-term economy key is a little squishier, but not much, that there is no recession in the election year. And what I said was, if you have overwhelming perception that the economy is in recession, and the example I gave was 1992, when 75 to 80% of Americans said the economy was in recession. But at the same time, the National Bureau of Economic Research had declared a recession. So it was the combination of an objective evaluation of a recession along with the public perception. I've never turned that key just on public perception.
We have 1,300 people watching, but only 667 likes. If you're watching, please give the stream a like. That'd mean a lot to me. It'd mean a lot to this guy. It'd mean a lot to my dad.
Part of my legacy,
Yeah.
I'm almost as old as Biden.
What?
No, not quite.
Holy cow.
I'm almost as old as Trump.
What?
Yes, believe it or not. We're separated by less than a year.
Wow. Professor, do you know examples of past oligarchs and how the society dealt with them to reduce their harm?
Oh, there are many examples of oligarchs all over the world.
I mean, oligarchs ran the world for most of human history.
As
right?
I said, I've said this many times, democracy is just a speck over the long course of human history. And sometimes oligarchs have been defeated externally, like the oligarchs who ran Germany, Italy, and Japan were defeated through World War II. And sometimes they're defeated internally by the contradictions that they create and the way they oppress the people of their nation. And the classic example of that is the collapse of the Soviet Union, at least a brief emergence of democracy in the republics that were shuffled off and in Russia itself. Unfortunately, that didn't last, but that was an example of an overturning of an oligarchy from within.
Have the oligarchs been defeated by their own money because they're now only slaves having to obey Trump?
I'm not sure I understand.
I guess they're saying they've gotten so rich and powerful.
But why would that defeat them? Let me sort of analyze that question. It is possible that they could be defeated by their own greed, like we saw in the Soviet Union, that there is such a contradiction between those who are privileged within the society and all the rest of us that the oligarchy cannot stand. It crumbles from the bottom up. But I haven't seen any sign of that yet in this country.
Right. How many more questions? We're at 59. How many more questions do you want?
3 more questions.
3 more questions.
These are really great questions.
Honky Monkey says, a YouGov poll showed Biden's handling of Gaza showed that this was voters' number one reason for staying home. In light of this, did the administration lose the military success key?
Absolutely. And I did report
they won.
A result of Gaza.
They won the military success key. Am I getting confused?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right. Like, did they
lost the failure key.
Right.
Because of Gaza.
Right.
And I reported that indeed they lost the failure key, and I had a success in that it was Biden and Biden alone who put together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin from quickly conquering Ukraine and then going on to destroying America's national security by threatening our NATO allies in Europe. That will go down as one of the great historic presidential achievements. But yes, Gaza was a failure, a disaster, and I called it that way.
But it wasn't so bad that it made the military success key
They're separate,
false.
and they often split. Jimmy Carter, for example, split the two keys. He won the success key for the Camp David Accords and lost the failure key for the Iran hostage crisis. And the two were totally separate events.
How many more questions do you want? I forgot.
Two
One
more.
more? Two more? All right. Why did the 13 key system start with the 1860 presidential election instead of 1800?
Yeah.
The first contested presidential election was held in 1800 between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson.
That's correct. I started in 1860 because that was the beginning of the modern political system of competition between Republicans and Democrats. In the 1850s, the Whig Party fell apart, and two different parties, the American or Know-Nothing Party and the Republican Party, were competing to be who would be the second major party to compete with the existing Democratic Party. The Republican Party won out, and 1860 marks the beginning of the modern system of two parties, Republicans and Democrats. You have to start somewhere, and I thought that was a good place to start. Plus, in 1800, it was an entirely different system. You had electors voting for two candidates. There were no tickets. The president, providing he got a majority, would be the one who got the most votes. The vice president, who could be from the opposite party, which happened in those elections, would be the vice president. So it was a totally different system. Plus, the farther back you go, the more difficult any kind of statistics become.
Yeah. I've seen some people in the last couple of weeks talk about the post-show. While my dad's here, I'm spending time with him. So there's no post-show, but once we are no longer together, there will be a post-show again. So stay tuned for next week for the post-show.
Absolutely.
This is a comment from...
Last question, I guess.
Right. This is a comment. We'll do a comment and a question. This is a comment from Jeff V. They say, your subscriber growth post-election, so there's a great demand for facts. I think the country more fully realizes the value of good information. Thank you, Jeff.
I think that's right. I think we're seeing a backlash.
Yeah.
Not, of course, for everyone, but for a significant segment of the American people. We're seeing a backlash against fabrications and disinformation. And I think that's reflected in our increased subscriber base. As I said, we're not always right. Everyone makes mistakes. We can be in error, but we strive, and that's where the difference becomes between those and the purveyors of disinformation. We strive to give you the truth. We strive to give you the best knowledge that we have. And when I don't know something, like, the El Salvador situation, I'll tell you.
All right, final question of the night. A positive one from our friend James Lagruda. They say, are there any silver linings on the horizon for the future of our country?
Absolutely. As I said, we did see some bipartisan cooperation in the negotiations for the ceasefire. Maybe that will carry over. We have a strong economy. I don't think we're going to be plunging into recession anytime soon. And there is a corrective to the current domination of conservative Republicans, and that's the midterm elections of 2026. And midterm elections are a corrective to the presidential election year, and usually the party holding the presidency, unless they do incredibly well, like FDR in his first midterm, they're likely to suffer losses, and you're likely to see changes in the balance of power in the House and the Senate. Okay. And also, in a lot of critical swing states, they have Democratic governors. A check to Donald Trump. North Carolina, I think Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, all have Democratic governors.
There you go. With that, we will wrap.
Pennsylvania.
With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live on this day, January 16th, 2025. Do you have any? I guess that was your final word to the people, right?
That was my final word. Don't despair.
Okay. Good night, folks. See you next week.